All right, so you guys sent in some pretty wild footage of a waterspout near an airport in Indonesia, and we're going to deep dive into it today. Um, what caused it? Could it happen in other places? And why should you care, even if you aren't planning a trip to Southeast Asia?
Well, what's really fascinating to me is that this waterspout appeared right by the Yogyakarta International Airport. Kind of makes you wonder about,
Hmm.
you know,
The safety
yeah,
of all those planes.
yeah, definitely. And it was caught on video on Instagram by @visitskulonprogo. If you want to go check it out, it's pretty crazy. But first, can we maybe just get like a quick rundown of like what a waterspout actually
It's
is?
a definite. So you can essentially imagine a tornado,
Yeah.
but instead of tearing through Kansas, it's partying over water.
Okay, so we're talking like a powerful spinning column of air and water.
Mhm.
But we see big storm clouds all the time. So what makes this situation in Indonesia so special that it spawns a waterspout? Well, that's where those cumulonimbus clouds come in. They're like nature's way of saying showtime. These clouds.
Hmm.
They're notorious for heavy rain, lightning, crazy strong winds, all the perfect ingredients for whipping up a waterspout.
That makes sense. And the Yogyakarta Meteorological Station, they confirmed this, right?
Exactly. The head of the station, Warjono. He even said, waterspout can occur due to the presence of a cumulonimbus cloud system above a water body.
So those dramatic thunderclouds brewing are basically the starting point, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just the clouds themselves.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's not as simple as cumulonimbus equals instant waterspout. You need a few other atmospheric conditions to be just right. Kind of like baking a cake. Too much of one ingredient, not enough of another, and the whole thing flops.
All right, so let's talk about those ingredients then. What else is needed to cook up one of these swirling
Well,
spectacles?
you need warm water, obviously, and you also need moist air. Think of it as the humidity that makes your hair frizz on bad days. And then there's wind shear, which is where things get really interesting.
Okay, unpack this wind shear thing for me. What makes it so crucial?
Well, for all you aviation enthusiasts out there, think of wind shear as a giant blender in the sky. It whips up these different layers of wind, creating that spin that's crucial for a waterspout. And depending on the intensity, it could be a really bumpy ride for even the most seasoned pilots.
Yeah, that's a little unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, if these things can be dangerous to planes, what happened with flights near the Indonesian airport? Were there any close calls?
Thankfully, no. Air traffic wasn't affected this time. But it does kind of highlight why understanding waterspouts is so important, even if you're nowhere near Indonesia.
Right, and that brings up a question that's probably on everyone's mind right now. Could a waterspout happen in my area?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. It all comes down to understanding the unique weather conditions and geography of your specific region. So,
Right,
yeah,
right.
and we were just talking about those waterspouts, how they form and whether they can happen anywhere. It all comes down to, those key ingredients.
Right, those ingredients. And speaking of unpredictable weather, I can't resist a good story. History must be packed with some pretty wild waterspout tales, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are accounts going back centuries, long before we had radar and satellites to, track these things. It gives you a real sense of, how people tried to make sense of these swirling giants before modern science came along.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay some of those historical highlights on me.
Okay, well, how about this? Even way back in ancient Greece, Aristotle himself tried to explain waterspouts. He described them as columns of water raised by the wind.
Wow, so this isn't some new phenomenon. People have been watching them for ages, but I'm guessing Aristotle didn't have it all figured out back then.
Well, he was working with what he had. He thought the sun's heat drawing water vapor up was the cause, which isn't entirely wrong,
Right.
but, as we've discussed, there's a lot more to it than that.
Right, right. Makes sense. Did anyone else in history have a go at explaining them?
Well, let's fast forward a bit to the age of exploration. And you've got all these sailors encountering waterspouts on their voyages.
Yeah.
Columbus, for example, described seeing one during his first trip across the Atlantic.
Oh, wow. So even Columbus saw one. What did he think they were?
He actually saw it as a sign of good luck, which, knowing what we know now about their power, is kind of ironic.
Yeah, talk about a change in perspective. So we've got ancient philosophers, intrepid explorers. Anyone else try to, crack the waterspout code?
Well, if we fast forward a few more centuries, you've got Benjamin Franklin. Yes, that Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
Observing and experimenting with waterspouts. And he got pretty close to our modern understanding, theorizing that wind and low atmospheric pressure were the main culprits.
That's amazing. So from ancient Greece to Ben Franklin's experiments, it seems like every era had its own way of wrapping their heads around these things. So let's fast forward to today. We've talked about what causes waterspouts, but where do they actually happen most often? Are we talking, just tropical locales, or can these things pop up anywhere?
That's a great question. They're definitely more frequent in those tropical and subtropical zones where you have, that warm water and humid air we talked about earlier. Places like the southeastern U.S., Mediterranean, parts of Southeast Asia, those are, waterspout hotspots.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about areas that are, colder or drier? Are those completely off the hook?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, they're less common,
Yeah.
but you can get them in those higher latitudes too, even in places like the Great Lakes or off the coast of Europe.
Huh, interesting. So those colder water spouts, are they basically the same beast, just, maybe a bit smaller?
Exactly. Think of it like this. A waterspout in the tropics is like a bodybuilder, flexing its full potential. But in those colder areas, it's more like someone just starting at the gym, still got the moves, but not quite as powerful.
I like that. That's a great analogy. So while those warm, humid areas are prime real estate for water spouts, they're not the only Worley place to find them. So let's talk about the science behind all of this. Are we getting any better at predicting when and where these swirling spectacles are going to show up?
Oh, absolutely. Scientists are using all sorts of really cool tech nowadays, weather radar, satellite imagery, you've got your computer models, all to study waterspouts in detail.
So are we at a point now where we can pinpoint, exactly when and where one is going to form? Like, heads up, folks, waterspout at 3 p.m. sharp, 2 miles off the coast.
Well, not quite there yet. They're still pretty unpredictable, but we're getting much better at forecasting,
Yeah.
those conditions that are favorable for them. Think of it like this. We might not be able to tell you exactly when the cake will be done, but we can definitely tell you when it's in the oven and starting to, smell good.
Okay, that makes sense. We're getting better at spotting those telltale signs. So what are some of the cutting edge research areas that are helping us understand waterspouts better? What are the scientists really focusing on these days?
Well, one big area is wind shear. Remember that blender in the sky, mixing up those winds at different heights?
Right. We
Well,
talked about that earlier. Seems like it plays a big role in giving those waterspouts their spin.
exactly. Scientists are really studying exactly HLW. Wind shear contributes to the formation of that rotating column of air. They're looking at things like,
Yeah,
the
right.
speed and direction of the winds at different levels
Hmm.
and how that affects, the likelihood of a waterspout forming.
So they're really trying to pinpoint those exact conditions that make those winds go haywire and create a waterspout. Fascinating stuff. Any other research highlights you want to share?
Well, another big focus is on the interaction between the waterspout and the water surface itself.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at, how heat and moisture are exchanged between the air and the water and how that affects things like, the intensity and lifespan of the waterspout.
So basically, they're trying to figure out how the water itself is fueling the fire, so to speak.
Exactly. They found that,
Yeah.
the temperature difference between the air and the water plays a huge role. You've got warm air over cooler water. It creates this instability. That's just perfect for waterspouts.
So the bigger the temperature difference, the more likely it is that a waterspout will form.
You got it. And of course, it's not just one factor. It's like a recipe, remember?
Hmm.
But understanding this temperature interplay is a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about all these intricate processes happening, all culminating in those spectacular events. So it's not just about the swirling spectacle itself, it's about understanding those hidden forces at play. Any other research avenues that you think are particularly interesting?
Definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work being done with those computer models, trying to simulate waterspout formation.
Right. So basically, they're creating virtual waterspouts in a computer. What's the benefit of that?
Well, it lets them test out,
Mm.
different theories and scenarios. They can tweak the ingredients in the model, like,
Mhm.
wind speed, humidity, temperature, and see how that affects whether a virtual waterspout forms or not.
So it's like a virtual laboratory for waterspouts,
Yeah.
where they can run all sorts of experiments without having to wait for the perfect conditions in real life.
Exactly. And that helps us, refine our understanding.
Yeah.
And hopefully, get even better at predicting these things in the future.
Amazing. It seems like we're making huge strides in understanding these swirling wonders, but as with, anything in science, I'm sure there's still plenty of unanswered questions.
Absolutely. Waterspout research is a constantly evolving field. For example, scientists are still trying to completely unravel the role of atmospheric waves and waterspout formation.
So we've made great progress. But there are still some waterspout secrets waiting to be uncovered.
Precisely. And that's what keeps things interesting, right? You know, the natural world still has plenty of mysteries up its sleeve.
Yeah.
But beyond just the science of,
Mm.
individual waterspouts, we also need to think about the bigger picture.
Okay, what do you mean by the bigger picture?
Well, waterspouts aren't just isolated events. They're part of a much larger system, our planet's climate system. And that brings up some, really intriguing questions.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our waterspout deep dive. And we've covered the science, the history. Now I'm ready for some of those jaw-dropping waterspout stories you mentioned.
Oh,
The ones that make you realize how powerful nature can be.
Oh, I've got some good ones for you.
Hmm.
How about a whole parade of waterspouts?
Wait, a whole parade?
Yeah, back in 1923 off the coast of Malta, there was this incredible event. Multiple waterspouts formed and just danced along the coastline for miles.
Okay, I need details. What did people say about it back then?
Newspapers at the time called it a spectacle of awe-inspiring grandeur. Witnesses described seeing these waterspouts swirling across the water, some of them reaching heights of over 1,000 feet,
Whoa, taller than the Eiffel Tower?
taller than the Eiffel Tower.
That's just mind-blowing. It must have been terrifying and beautiful all at the same time. Makes our Indonesian airport waterspout look tiny in comparison.
It definitely puts things in perspective, yeah.
Mhm.
And it highlights the wide range of scales these things can occur on. We've got everything from those smaller gym beginner waterspouts in colder areas to these towering Eiffel Tower-sized giants.
So what other waterspout events have really captured people's imaginations over the years?
Well, in 2019, there was a massive waterspout near Tampa Bay, Florida. This one actually made landfall and turned into a tornado, causing quite a bit of damage.
Okay, that's a good reminder that while we're marveling at these things, they can be seriously dangerous, especially when they decide to come ashore. I guess it reinforces that whole respect the power of nature idea.
Exactly. And then there was this incredible event in 2003 off the coast of Australia. A gigantic waterspout formed over a mile wide at its base. People were stunned when they saw the video footage.
A mile wide? Seriously, I can't even picture that. It's just immense.
It really is. These are the kinds of events that make you realize just how powerful the forces at play in our atmosphere are. And it underscores the importance of understanding these phenomena, not just for the sake of scientific curiosity, but for practical reasons like safety and preparedness.
Totally agree. So we've talked about the science, the history, but you also mentioned that waterspouts have cultural significance in different societies. What did you mean by that?
Well, think about it. For centuries, people have been witnessing these towering columns of water rising from the sea, often without any scientific understanding of what was causing them.
Right, it must have seemed almost magical or supernatural.
Exactly. So it's not surprising that waterspouts became woven into folklore, mythology, and even spiritual beliefs in different cultures around the world.
So how have different cultures interpreted these events?
Well, in some coastal communities, they're seen as mythical creatures or spirits, often associated with both good luck and bad luck, depending on the specific beliefs. In some cultures, they're viewed as omens, predicting storms or changes in the weather. And in others, they're incorporated into stories about the power of the sea or the gods.
That makes total sense. They're such striking events, it's easy to see how they would inspire those kinds of interpretations. It's a reminder that we humans have always tried to find meaning and make sense of the world around us, especially those things we don't fully understand.
I completely agree. These cultural narratives highlight the long and fascinating relationship between humans and the natural world. It's about observation, interpretation, respect, and sometimes a healthy dose of awe and fear.
For sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the science, the history, the cultural significance, and I'm feeling a lot more informed about those swirling wonders. But what about the future of waterspout research? What are the big questions that scientists are still grappling with?
Well, there's still so much to learn. But I think advancements in technology are going to play a huge role. For example, with drones and high-resolution satellites, we'll be able to gather much more precise data about waterspouts. We'll get a closer look at their structure, their movements, and how they evolve over time.
So we're talking about getting even more detailed close-up views of those swirling columns. That's exciting. What about those computer models we talked about earlier? Any predictions for how those will advance our understanding?
Well, as computing power continues to increase, those models will become even more sophisticated. They'll be able to simulate those complex atmospheric processes with even greater accuracy. And that means more reliable forecasts, potentially even getting to a point where we can give people more precise warnings about waterspout formation.
That's a game changer, especially for those living or traveling in waterspout-prone areas. But I'm guessing climate change is going to add another layer of complexity to all of this.
Absolutely. As our climate continues to change, we need to understand how those changes will affect waterspouts. Will they become more frequent, more intense? Will their distribution shift as ocean temperatures rise? These are all crucial questions that scientists are investigating right now.
Wow, it's a reminder that even though we're making progress, there's still so much to learn, and that learning is more important than ever as we face the challenges of a changing world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
No,
But even with all the ongoing research, there's something to be said for simply appreciating the wonder of these natural events.
absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the science and forget about the sheer awe-inspiring spectacle of a waterspout rising from the sea. It's a reminder that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Well said. So to everyone listening, the next time you see a waterspout, whether it's in a photo, a video, or even just a story, remember everything we've talked about, the science, the history, the cultural stories, and the mysteries that are still waiting to be unraveled.
What a fantastic way to wrap up our deep dive. This has been truly fascinating. And to our listeners, as always, thanks for diving in with us. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of wonder about the world around us.